I was just fixing her garden. That's all it was supposed to be. A simple landscaping job on Maple Street, maybe plant some tomatoes, clear out the weeds, and be home by dinner. But then, while I was kneeling in the dirt adjusting her irrigation system, she looked down at me with those thoughtful green eyes and said the words that would change everything. "Would you stay here, even if I'm 56? I'm serious. I froze, my hands still buried in the soil, and realized that sometimes the most life-changing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Moments happen when you're least prepared for them. But let me start from the beginning, because that morning felt like any other Tuesday. In my life, as Daniel Keyes, independent landscaper and professional fixer of other people's outdoor problems, the alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., same as always. I rolled out of my twin bed in the studio apartment I'd been renting for 3 years, stepped over the pile of clean laundry I'd been meaning to fold for a week, and made my way to the kitchen. Coffee first. Always coffee first. The machine gurgled to life while I stared out the small window at Mrs. Patterson's overgrown hedge that she'd been asking me to trim for months. I made a mental note to finally get to it, knowing full well I'd probably forget again by noon. My phone buzzed against the chipped Formica counter. K-text from my sister, Savannah Harold. "Mom wants to know if you're bringing anyone to Tommy's graduation party next weekend." I deleted it without responding. At 32, I'd learned that ignoring family questions about my love life was easier than explaining why a guy who spent his days making other people's yards beautiful couldn't seem to cultivate anything meaningful in his own personal life. I grabbed a stale protein bar from the cabinet, the kind that tastes like cardboard mixed with artificial strawberry, and checked my schedule. 3 jobs today: finish the Petersons' retaining wall, install a sprinkler system for the new family on Oak Drive, and then the afternoon appointment that had come in late yesterday, emergency garden repair for someone named Emily Lester on Maple Street. The voice on the phone had been warm but frantic, something about a garden disaster and needing help before her book club meeting on Thursday by 7:15. I was loading my truck with the usual arsenal: shovels, rakes, a wheelbarrow that had seen better decades, and the industrial-strength coffee thermos that had become my most reliable companion. The radio crackled to life as I pulled out of the driveway. Some talk show hosts arguing with a caller about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. I switched to classic rock and drove through the quiet suburban streets of Riverside, watching the neighborhood wake up through kitchen windows and garage doors rolling open. The Peterson job went smoothly. Dave Peterson, a retired accountant, with strong opinions about proper drainage, supervised from his deck chair while I mortared the final stones into place. He paid in cash and offered me a beer, which I politely declined since it wasn't even 10 a.m. yet. The Oak Drive sprinkler installation took longer than expected. The previous homeowner had apparently buried a collection of ceramic garden gnomes throughout the yard, and I spent an extra hour carefully excavating what looked like a gnome graveyard. By 1:30 p.m., I was ready for lunch and the mysterious garden emergency on Maple Street. I'd driven past the house before, a charming blue cottage with white trim. It's probably built in the 1940s, with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees that provided perfect shade. It was the kind of house that made you slow down as you drove by, the kind that whispered stories about Sunday dinners and children's laughter echoing from the backyard. I pulled into the driveway and immediately understood the emergency. What had once been a carefully planned vegetable garden now looked like a crime scene. Tomato plants lay scattered across the yard, their roots exposed and wilting in the afternoon sun. A trellis system had collapsed, taking down what appeared to be cucumber vines and bean plants. Garden hoses snaked across the lawn like confused pithires, and there was dirt everywhere on the porch steps, splattered against the side of the house, even somehow coating the mailbox. That's when I saw her. Emily Lester stood in the middle of the chaos, wearing dirt-stained jeans and a faded University of Colorado t-shirt, holding a broken tomato cage like it had personally offended her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail with loose strands framing her face, and she had that particular expression of someone who had been battling inanimate objects and losing. She was probably in her mid-50s, with laugh lines around her eyes in the kind of posture that suggested she was used to handling her own problems, but had finally met her match. When she noticed my truck, her face lit up with relief. She dropped the tomato cage and walked over, extending a hand that was significantly more dirt-covered than mine. "You must be Daniel," she said, her voice carrying a slight rasp like she'd been laughing, or maybe cursing at vegetables all morning. "I'm Emily. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I may have declared war on my garden, and I think the garden won." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. "Looks like you've had quite a battle here. What happened?" She gestured helplessly at the destruction. "I was trying to install a new drip irrigation system. How hard could it be, right? Turns out very hard when you accidentally hit the main water line with a shovel, and then panic and start pulling up plants to find the shutoff valve that doesn't exist where the internet said it would be." I couldn't help but smile. The internet lies about plumbing. That's the first rule of home improvement. "I'm learning that the hard way," she said, pushing a strand of hair away from her face and leaving a small streak of mud on her cheek. "My book club is coming over Thursday evening, and I promised them fresh tomatoes and basil for bruschetta. Right now, the only thing fresh about this garden is the disaster. Looking around at the carnage, I estimated it would take most of the afternoon to assess the damage, salvage what could be saved, and create a plan for recovery. But something about Emily's combination of determination and vulnerability made me want to help her succeed. "Well," I said, unloading my tools, "let's see what we can save and figure out how to get you back in the tomato business." We worked side by side for the next hour, and I discovered that Emily Lester was full of surprises. She wasn't the type to stand back and supervise while someone else got dirty. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and dove in, following my lead. As we carefully unearthed salvageable plants and assessed the irrigation damage, "So how did you end up in the garden destruction business?" I asked, gently lifting a traumatized basil plant that looked like it had been through a tornado. Emily laughed, a genuine sound that made her whole face light up. "I'm a retired English teacher. 32 years of correcting grammar and trying to convince teenagers that Shakespeare was actually entertaining. When I moved here 6 months ago, I thought gardening would be peaceful. Turns out plants are just as stubborn as 15-year-olds, but they don't talk back." I carefully replanted the basil in a temporary container. "Where did you move from?"
Phoenix,
she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I lived there for 28 years with my ex-husband Derek. After the divorce was finalized, I decided I wanted seasons again. Real seasons, not just hot and slightly less hot." She gestured toward the oak trees. "I wanted a place where I could sit on a porch and watch leaves change color." There was something in her voice when she mentioned the divorce, not bitterness. Exactly, but a weariness that suggested it hadn't been easy. I decided not to pry. Instead, I focused on untangling a cucumber vine that had somehow wrapped itself around a sprinkler head. "What made you choose Riverside?" I asked, honestly. I threw a dart at a map. She grinned at my surprised expression, not literally, but close. "I wanted somewhere small enough to feel like a community, but big enough to have a decent bookstore. When I drove through downtown and saw the old Carnegie Library building and that little coffee shop with the hand-painted sign, I knew this was it." We moved to the tomato plants next. Most were beyond saving, but a few hardy specimens might survive. With some TLC, as we worked, Emily told me about her book club, which she'd started as a way to meet people. They met every other Thursday, rotating between houses. And this week's selection was a mystery novel set in an English garden. Hence the pressure for fresh tomatoes, she explained. "May have oversold my gardening abilities when I volunteered." "To host, what did you tell them exactly?" I asked, curious about what constituted overselling in the tomato department. I may have mentioned that I was planning to grow heirloom varieties and that we'd have a garden two-table-themed discussion. She looked sheepish. "I watched too many cooking shows during the divorce proceedings. They made it look so easy." I laughed. "Cooking shows are basically fiction, like romantic comedies, but with vegetables." "Exactly. Nobody mentions that tomatoes are divas, or that irrigation systems are apparently designed by people who hate homeowners. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As we continued working, I found myself telling her about my own life. I'd started landscaping after my construction job ended when the housing market crashed 5 years ago. How I'd initially planned it as temporary work while I figured out what to do next, but discovered I actually loved being outdoors, creating something beautiful with my hands. "Do you miss construction?" Emily asked, carefully removing dirt from around a pepper plant's roots. "Sometimes," I admitted. I liked building things that would last. Houses, structures, something permanent. But landscaping has its own rewards. Plants grow and change. You're not just creating something once. You're nurturing it over time. She nodded thoughtfully. That's what I loved about teaching. You plant seeds in young minds, and sometimes years later, you hear from a former student who tells you that something you said made a difference. "Do you miss it?" Teaching, Emily paused, considering. "I miss the students, most of them anyway. I don't miss the politics, the standardized testing, the feeling that education was becoming more about data points than developing human beings." She looked around at her disrupted garden. "I thought I'd have more time for the things I love. Reading, traveling, apparently failing at vegetable cultivation." "You're not failing," I said. "You just hit a learning curve. Besides, anyone brave enough to tackle irrigation on their own has the right mindset for gardening. Brave or stupid. Both, usually. That's what makes gardening interesting." By the time we'd sorted through the plant casualties, the afternoon sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the yard. I'd managed to save about half of Emily's vegetables, and we'd cleared a path for installing a simpler irrigation. A system that wouldn't require excavating half the neighborhood. "I should probably let you get to your next job," Emily said, but she didn't sound like she really wanted me to leave. "Actually, you're my last appointment today," I said. "If you don't mind, I'd like to draw up a plan for replanting. Show you what we can save and what you might want to replace." Her face brightened. "Really? You don't have somewhere else to be?" I thought about my empty apartment, the frozen dinner waiting in my freezer, and the Netflix queue that had become my primary social interaction. Nowhere important. Emily disappeared into the house and returned with a pitcher of iced tea and 2 glasses. Real iced tea, not the powdered kind, with fresh mint leaves floating on top. We sat on her porch steps, and she spread out a notebook, where she'd sketched her original garden plan. "I'm not much of an artist," she said, "but I had big dreams." Looking at her careful drawings, complete with measurements and plant spacing notes, I could see that Emily had done her research. Her plan was actually quite good, ambitious maybe, but well thought out. "This is impressive," I said. "Most people just plant randomly and hope for the best. I'm a teacher, remember? I plan everything." Derek used to joke that I'd make a grocery list for buying milk. Her expression softened slightly, though I guess that's past tense now. There was a moment of comfortable silence as we sipped our tea and watched a neighbor's cat stalking something invisible in the grass. The evening air was cooling, and somewhere nearby, someone was grilling dinner, the smell of charcoal and seasoning drifting over. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said suddenly. "Sure. Do you think it's crazy? Starting over at 56, moving to a new place, trying new things, basically rebuilding everything?" I considered her question carefully. "I think it's brave. Most people just accept that their lives are set after a certain age. You decided you wanted something different and went after it. Even if I'm terrible at irrigation systems, especially because you're terrible at irrigation systems, anyone can master something they're naturally good at. It takes courage to keep trying when you're bad at something." Emily smiled, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked truly relaxed. "Thank you for saying that, and thank you for today." I was starting to think I'd made a huge mistake with this whole new life experiment. "Give it time," I said. "Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are gardens. Or new lives, for that matter." As the sun set behind the oak trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized I didn't want to leave. Emily's porch, with its comfortable chaos and her easy conversation, Felt more like home than anywhere I'd been in a long time. The next morning, I found myself driving back to Emily's house with my truck loaded with replacement plants and a new irrigation kit. I told myself it was just good customer service, but the truth was I'd been thinking about our conversation all night. Something about the way she'd talked about starting over, about being brave enough to try new things even when you might fail. It had struck a chord I didn't even know I had. Emily was already outside when I arrived, kneeling beside the surviving tomato plants with a watering can and what appeared to be a serious conversation happening between her and a wilted basil plant. "Any breakthrough in plant psychology?" I called out as I unloaded my gear. She looked up, her face breaking into that warm smile that had been stuck in my head since yesterday. "I'm trying positive reinforcement, telling them they're strong survivors and that better days are ahead." She paused. "I think the basil is skeptical, smart plant. Basil doesn't believe in false hope." We fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side as we began the process of replanting. I brought 3 varieties of tomatoes that would be more forgiving for a beginner gardener, along with herbs that were practically indestructible. As we dug new holes and carefully positioned each plant, Emily peppered me with questions about soil conditions, watering schedules, and companion planting. "You're a natural teacher," I observed, watching her take detailed notes in a small garden journal. "Even when you're the student, old habits," she said. "I can't help but organize information. Derek used to say I turned everything into a lesson plan." She caught herself mentioning her ex-husband again and made a small face. "Sorry, I keep doing that. It's a hard habit to break. Don't apologize. 28 years doesn't just disappear overnight." "No, but sometimes I wish it would." She sat back on her heels, looking thoughtful. "We were together for so long that I'm not sure who I am without being half of a couple. Does that make sense?" I nodded, though my own relationship history was more about never finding someone I wanted to be half of anything with. It makes perfect sense. You're figuring out who Emily is when she gets to make all the decisions.
Exactly. Her eyes lit up, like moving here. Derek would have researched for months, made spreadsheets, visited 3 times before deciding, but I just knew. Something about this place felt right. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the morning sun warming our backs as we gave Emily's garden a second chance. I found myself stealing glances at her as she worked, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, how she gently talked to each plant as we settled it into its new home. The small, satisfied smile when she got the spacing just right. "Can I tell you something?" Emily said suddenly, her hands stilling in the dirt. "Of course I haven't felt this. I don't know, present in a long time. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I want to be doing." She looked around at the garden, then at me. "It's been a long time since I felt useful and happy at the same time. The garden therapy working? Maybe. Or maybe it's the company." She said it lightly, but there was something deeper in her tone. That made my heart skip a beat. We moved on to installing the new irrigation system, a much simpler setup than the complicated network Molly had attempted the day before. As I showed her how to connect the drip lines and adjust the flow rates, our hands brushed more than once. Each time, I felt a little jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the garden tools. "This is so much easier than what I was trying to do," Emily said, watching me demonstrate the timer settings. "Why do they even sell those complicated systems to regular people? Same reason they sell advanced woodworking tools to weekend warriors. Hope and optimism are big business." She laughed. I thought I was just bad at irrigation. "You're not bad at anything. You just aimed high on your first try." We were kneeling side by side, adjusting the final drip emitters around the tomato plants, when Emily went quiet. I could sense her thinking about something, the same way you can feel a storm coming before the clouds appear. "Daniel," she said finally, her voice softer than usual. "Yeah. Can I ask you something personal?" I looked up from the irrigation line I was securing. Her green eyes were serious now, searching my face like she was trying to read something important there. "Sure," I said, though something in her tone made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. She took a breath. I could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to say. "Do you think age really matters? In relationships, I mean?"
Question hung between us like morning mist. I could feel the weight of it, the way it seemed to change the very air around us. Depends on the people involved, I said carefully. Why? Emily looked down at her hands, still covered in garden soil, then back up at me. Because I keep thinking about yesterday, about how easy it was to talk to you, how comfortable I felt. And I know I'm 56 and you're ... double quotes, she paused. 32? She nodded like she'd suspected as much. 32. Which means I'm old enough to be well, not your mother, but your much older sister who made some questionable life choices. I couldn't help but smile. Is that what you think this is? Questionable life choices? I don't know what this is, she said honestly. But I know that when you smile at me like that, I forget about spreadsheets and lesson plans and all the sensible things I'm supposed to worry about. We were still kneeling in the dirt, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Close enough to catch the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with garden soil and morning air. Emily, I started, but she held up a hand. Me ask you this, she said, her voice steady now, determined. And I want you to be completely honest with me. I nodded. She looked directly into my eyes, and I could see her heart in her expression, vulnerable but brave, hopeful but prepared for disappointment. Would you stay here, even if I'm 56? I'm serious. Question hit me like a physical force. Not just the words, but the courage it had taken to ask them. The way she was looking at me like my answer might change everything. I stayed perfectly still, my hands frozen on the irrigation line, processing what she'd just asked. Not just about age, but about staying, about choosing her, choosing this, choosing us, over whatever's safer. More conventional options might be waiting somewhere else. The morning sun was warm on my back. Birds were singing in the oak trees, and Emily Lester was looking at me with the kind of honest hope that I'd never seen directed at me before. And I realized that somewhere between yesterday's garden disaster and this moment, everything had changed. Yes, I said simply, I would. Smile that spread across her face was like watching the sun come up, slow at first, then brilliant and warm and impossible to look away from. Really? She whispered. Really, I said, and reached out to brush a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Age is just a number, Emily. What matters is how you make me feel. And how do I make you feel? I thought about it for a moment, trying to find words for something I'd never experienced before, like I'm home. She leaned forward then, just slightly, and I met her halfway. Our first kiss tasted like morning coffee and possibility, soft and tentative and perfect there in the middle of her rescued garden with dirt under our fingernails and the whole world suddenly full of promise. 3 days later, I was back at Emily's house with a truckload of mulch and what my sister Savannah would have called a suspicious amount of enthusiasm for garden maintenance. The truth was, I'd been looking for excuses to return ever since our kiss. Emily had texted me that morning asking if I could help spread mulch around the new plants, and I'd rearranged my entire schedule without a second thought. Emily met me in the driveway wearing a sun hat that looked like it had seen better decades and gardening gloves that were clearly brand new. I may have overestimated my mulch spreading abilities, she said, gesturing toward the massive pile the delivery truck had dumped on her lawn. I thought a yard of mulch meant, yard-sized. I laughed, grabbing my rake from the truck. It's a cubic yard. It's about 27 cubic feet of wood chips, which is roughly enough to cover half your county. Well, that explains why my neighbors had been walking by more slowly than usual. I think Mrs. Peterson from across the street has driven past 4 times this morning. As if summoned by her words, a woman in her 70s appeared at the edge of Emily's driveway. She had the determined stride of someone with opinions and the time to share them. Emily, dear, she called out. I couldn't help but notice all the ... activity over here lately. Her eyes moved from Emily to me and back again, the way someone might examine an unusual species of bird, Jennifer, Emily said, her voice taking on a polite but slightly wary tone. It's getting some help with the garden. Jennifer Peterson, this is Daniel Keyes. Daniel, Jennifer. Jennifer Peterson sized me up with the efficiency of someone who'd been evaluating potential threats to neighborhood. Property values for decades. Keys, she repeated. Are you related to the Keys family that runs the auto shop on Elm Street? That's my Uncle Aaron's place, I said, offering what I hoped was a reassuring smile. Jennifer's expression suggested this information was being filed away for future reference. You're helping Emily with her ... gardening. There was something in the way she said gardening that made it sound like a euphemism for something much more scandalous. Daniel's a professional landscaper, Emily said firmly. He's been helping me recover from my irrigation disaster. I see. Jennifer's gaze lingered on the mulch pile. It's quite a lot of mulch for one garden, very ambitious. I was starting to understand that Jennifer Peterson spoke in a code where ambitious meant suspicious, and I see meant I disapprove. Better to have too much than too little, I said diplomatically. Jennifer nodded slowly. Indeed. Well, I suppose you'll be wanting to get all that spread before it starts to smell. Mulch can get quite pungent in this heat. She gave Emily a meaningful look. I do hope you'll be mindful of the neighborhood standards, dear. Property values and all that.
After Jennifer retreated to her house, Emily shook her head. And that's why I moved from a subdivision with an HOA. I thought small towns would be more accepting of mulch piles.
Give her time, I said. Neighbors like Jennifer need a chance to get used to new things. New things like what? Mulch are men who are obviously younger than their divorced neighbors. I stopped raking. Is that what you think this is about? Emily sighed, pulling off her sun hat and running her fingers through her hair. I don't know, maybe. I've lived here 6 months, kept to myself, barely talked to anyone beyond pleasantries at the grocery store. Then suddenly I'm having landscaping done and people are paying attention. We worked in silence for a few minutes, spreading mulch around the tomato plants. But I could feel the weight of Emily's thoughts, the way yesterday's confidence had dimmed under Jennifer Peterson's scrutiny. Emily, I said finally, are you having second thoughts? She paused, leaning on her rake. About the mulch. Because honestly, this is harder than I expected. About us. The words hung between us like humidity before a storm. Emily looked down at the wood chips scattered around our feet, then back up at me. I keep thinking about what people see when they look at us, she said quietly. A 56-year-old woman and a 32-year-old man. And I wonder if they're thinking what I'm thinking, which is that I'm being ridiculous. That I'm some kind of, desperate divorcee having a midlife crisis with the landscaper. The hurt in her voice made my chest tighten. Is that what you think you're doing? I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. 3 days ago, I asked you the most forward question of my entire life, and you kissed me in my garden, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. But now, with Jennifer Peterson giving me looks like I'm planning to run a brothel, out of my potting shed, I'm wondering if I've lost my mind. I set down my rake and walked over to her. Emily, look at me. She raised her eyes to mine, and I could see the vulnerability there. The fear that she'd misread everything between us. What we have isn't about what other people think, I said. It's about how I feel when I'm with you, and how you feel when you're with me. Everything else is just noise. But the age thing is a number, I interrupted gently. You know what I see when I look at us? I see a woman who had the courage to start over when her life wasn't working. I see someone who asks honest questions and makes incredible iced tea and talks to her plants like they're old friends. And I see a man who's been sleepwalking through his own life until he met someone who makes him want to wake up. Emily's eyes softened. You really see all that? I see all that and more. And if Jennifer Peterson can't handle a little mulch and some honest conversation between neighbors, that's her problem, not ours. A slow smile spread across Emily's face. You know what? You're right. This is my house, my garden, my life, and my mulch. Exactly. Your mulch, your rules. We were laughing when a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. A young man in his early 20s hopped out, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a grin that looked remarkably familiar. Uncle Daniel, he called out. Mom said you were over here working. Thought I'd stop by and see if you needed help. I felt my stomach drop. My nephew Dave Harold had inherited the worst possible combination of traits. My sister's nosiness and my uncle's complete lack of filter. Dave, I said carefully, what are you doing here? Mom sent me, he said cheerfully. then noticed Emily. "Oh, hi. You must be the client." He looked around at the garden, the mulch pile, and Emily's flushed face. Uncle Daniel wasn't kidding when he said this was a big job. Emily raised an eyebrow at me. "You told your family about my garden? Just that I was helping someone with landscaping?" I said quickly. Dave grinned wider. "He said you were really nice and that your garden was a challenge, but that he enjoyed working here. Mom thinks he might have a crush." I wanted to disappear into the mulch pile. Dave, ... What? "It's sweet," sides, after Linda. "We were starting to worry you'd given up on women entirely." Emily looked between us with growing amusement. Linda, his ex-girlfriend Dave, explained helpfully. "She broke up with him because she said he was emotionally unavailable and more interested in plants than people. Which was totally unfair because Uncle Daniel likes people fine. He's just picky." "Dave," I said with more force, "maybe you could help us spread mulch instead of sharing my entire romantic history." "Sure." Dave grabbed a rake from my truck. "So how long have you two been dating?" Emily choked on a laugh. "We're not tie-mean. We're just there figuring it out," I said firmly, shooting Dave a warning look. Dave nodded sagely. "That's cool. Take your time. Mom always says the best relationships start as friendships anyway." He looked at Emily. "Plus, Uncle Daniel's really good at fixing things. Gardens, fences, relationships. He's like the Swiss Army knife of problem solving." Despite my mortification, Emily was smiling. "Is that so?" "Oh yeah. One time, he helped our neighbor Mrs. Chen when her sprinkler system flooded her basement. And he's always helping people with their yards. Mom says he has a hero complex, but I think he just likes making things better." As Dave chattered on about my various good deeds and supposed heroic tendencies, I caught Emily watching me with a new expression, something warmer and more considering than before. Maybe having family. Show up wasn't entirely a disaster after all. The following Saturday morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. It was barely 7 a.m., and the caller ID showed Emily's name. My first thought was that something had happened to the garden. Maybe a sprinkler malfunction or plant emergency. "Daniel?" Malay's voice was breathless and slightly panicked. "So sorry to call this early, but I have a situation, and I don't know who else to ask." I sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "My book club is coming over in 6 hours for our garden-themed meeting, and I just realized I have absolutely no idea how to harvest anything. I mean, I know you pick tomatoes when they're red, but some of these are yellowish red, and others are green but big, and I'm having a complete vegetable identity crisis." I couldn't help but smile at the genuine distress in her voice. "I'll be right over." 20 minutes later, I found Emily standing in her garden, wearing what appeared to be her most serious gardening outfit, khaki pants, long-sleeved shirt despite the warm weather, and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look like she was about to go on safari. She was holding a wicker basket and staring at the tomato plants like they might attack her. "Thank you for coming," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I know this is probably the most ridiculous emergency call you've ever received." "Even close," I assured her. "Last month, Mrs. Chen called me at midnight because she thought her roses were plotting against her. Turns out she'd been reading too many mystery novels." Emily laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Well, I haven't accused my vegetables of conspiracy yet, so I guess I'm doing better than average." I showed her how to test tomatoes for ripeness, which herbs could be cut without harming the plants, and how to harvest the baby lettuce she'd been nurturing. As we worked, filling her basket with fresh produce, Emily's confidence grew. She asked thoughtful questions and took mental notes with the same intensity she'd probably once applied to lesson planning. "You know," she said, carefully cutting basil stems, "I think I'm starting to understand why people find gardening addictive. There's something satisfying about growing your own food. Wait until you taste a tomato that was on the vine an hour ago," I said. "Store-bought will never be the same." We were interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. Emily looked up, checking her watch. "That's probably Penelope. She always arrives early to help set up." A woman in her 60s walked around the side of the house, carrying a covered dish and wearing a sundress that suggested she took book club fashion seriously. She had silver hair styled in a perfect bob, and the kind of confident posture that suggested she was used to being in charge. "Emily, darling," she called out, then stopped short when she noticed me. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Emily straightened up, basket in hand. "Penelope Harold, this is Daniel Keyes. He's been helping me with the garden." "Oh, Daniel this. Is Penelope my book club co-conspirator?" Penelope's eyes lit up with interest.
Keyes?
"Are you related to Aaron Keyes, who owns the garage?" "He's my uncle," I said, recognizing the same information-gathering instinct I'd seen in Jennifer Peterson, but with less suspicion. Wonderful man. He fixed my transmission last year and refused to charge me full price because I'm a widow. Studied me with frank curiosity. "So you're the garden miracle worker Emily's been telling us about?" Emily blushed. "I may have mentioned that Daniel saved my vegetables from certain death." "She's being modest," I said. "She did most of the work. I just provided technical support." Penelope beamed. "How refreshing. A man who doesn't take credit for everything." She turned to Emily. "I like him already." As if summoned by some book club telepathy, 2 more cars pulled into the driveway. Emily's eyes widened slightly. "They're all early. This never happens." "Maybe they're excited about the garden theme," I suggested. "Or maybe Penelope told them about the mysterious landscaper," Emily muttered under her breath. She was right. Within minutes, Emily's backyard was filled with 5 women, ranging in age from 45 to 70, all ostensibly there to discuss the mystery novel they'd read, but clearly more interested in getting a look at me. I found myself the center of attention as they peppered me with questions about everything from soil composition to my family history. "So you're single?" asked Margaret, a retired librarian with mischievous eyes. "Margaret," Emily protested. "What?" "It's a reasonable question." "Emily's single. He's single. They're both adults. I'm just gathering information." "For what?" Emily asked suspiciously. "Future reference," Margaret said innocently. I caught Emily's eye and saw her fighting back laughter. Despite her earlier nervousness, she seemed to be enjoying watching her. "Book club friends interrogate me," a lady's Penelope interrupted. "Let's give the man some breathing room. Besides, we have bruschetta to make with these beautiful vegetables." The next hour was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. What started as a book discussion quickly evolved into an impromptu cooking lesson, with me somehow appointed as the official tomato slicer, while the women debated whether the murderer in their novel had realistic gardening knowledge. "I'm telling you," declared Ruth, a retired nurse with strong opinions, "nobody kills someone with foxglove by accident. That stuff is clearly labeled as poisonous." "But the character was supposedly an amateur gardener," argued Sarah, the youngest. "Member at 45? Maybe she didn't know." "Daniel," Margaret called out, "you're a professional, obviously dangerous." I looked up from the tomatoes, suddenly aware that 6 pairs of eyes were focused on me expectantly. "Well, it's definitely toxic, but it's also really common in gardens. The flowers are beautiful, so people plant it without always reading the warnings." "See," Sarah said triumphantly, "accidental murder is totally plausible." "But would you plant foxglove without researching it first?" Ruth pressed. I glanced at Emily, who was trying not to laugh at my predicament. "I'd research it," I said diplomatically, "but not everyone is as careful as they should be with plants." The conversation continued in this vein, with me somehow becoming the expert witness in a fictional murder case. But what struck me wasn't the absurdity of the situation. It was how naturally Emily fit with these women, how easily she laughed and contributed to the conversation. This was her community, the life she was building for herself. And somehow, for this afternoon at least, I was part of it too. When the bruschetta was finally assembled and the book discussion properly concluded, Penelope pulled me aside. "You know," she said quietly, "Emily's been happier these past few weeks than I've seen her since she moved here. I don't know what your intentions are, young man, but I hope they're good ones." I looked across the yard where Emily was helping Margaret wrap up leftover bruschetta, her face bright with laughter at something Ruth had said. "They are," I said simply. Penelope nodded approvingly. "Good, because that woman deserves someone who sees how special she is." As the book club members began to leave, each one making a point to tell me how nice it was to meet me and how I should stop by any time, Emily walked me to my truck. "Thank you," she said, "not just for the vegetable tutorial, but for ... She gestured toward the house where laughter was still echoing from the porch, for being so gracious with them. "I know they can be a bit overwhelming." "I like them," I said honestly. "They obviously care about you. They do, and I think they like you, which is ... She paused, looking thoughtful. "It matters to me what they think." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," I said. "They're people now," she smiled. "Yeah, they are. And maybe if you want, you could be too." Tuesday morning started with a call that had nothing to do with gardens or Emily. My sister Savannah's voice was strained when she called at 6:47 a.m. Just as I was getting ready to head to a routine lawn maintenance job. "Daniel, I need a huge favor," she said without preamble. "Aaron's in the hospital." I nearly dropped my coffee. "What happened?" "Heart attack. He's stable now, but he's going to be laid up for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. The garage is completely swamped, and I don't know how to run the business side of things." Uncle Aaron had been more than just family to me. He'd given me my first job when I was 16, taught me everything I knew about fixing things, and had been the steady presence in our family when my dad left. The idea of him lying in a hospital bed made my chest tight. "I'll be right there," I said, already mentally rearranging my entire week. "There's more," Savannah continued. "He's got 3 cars promised by Thursday, including old Mrs. Martinez's Honda that she needs for her doctor's appointments. And you know, Aaron, he'd rather die than disappoint a customer." By 8 a.m., I was elbow deep in engine grease, trying to diagnose a transmission problem that Aaron could have identified in his sleep. My landscaping tools sat unused in my truck while I juggled phone calls from worried customers and attempted to decipher Aaron's cryptic note system. Around noon, covered in grease and frustration, I called Emily to explain why I wouldn't be able to help her plant the second round of herbs we'd planned for that afternoon. "Oh my goodness," she said immediately. "Is your uncle going to be okay?" "The doctors think so, but it's going to be a long recovery." "I'm sorry about the herbs. I know you wanted to get them in before the weekend." "Daniel," Emily said firmly, "forget about the herbs. Your family needs you. Is there anything I can do to help?" The offer caught me off guard. "I don't think I mean it's just car repair stuff. I may not know anything about cars, but I know about organization. I spent 32 years managing teenagers, which means I'm excellent at crowd control and crisis management." Before I could protest, Emily had hung up. 20 minutes later, she appeared at the garage wearing jeans and sneakers, carrying a thermos of coffee and what appeared to be a file folder. "Savannah Harold, I presume?" she said, extending her hand to my sister, who was standing behind the front counter, looking overwhelmed. "I'm Emily Lester. Daniel's been helping me with my garden, and I thought you might need some assistance." Savannah looked from Emily to me with undisguised curiosity. "You're the garden lady?" "Guilty as charged," Emily said cheerfully. A retired teacher with excellent organizational skills and nothing but time on my hands put me to work. What followed was one of the most surprisingly efficient afternoons I'd ever experienced. While I focused on the actual car repairs, Emily took charge of the office chaos. She created a system for tracking which cars needed what work, called customers to update them on delays, and somehow managed to reorganize Aaron's filing system. In a way that actually made sense, Savannah watched in amazement as Emily calmly handled an irate customer who was demanding his car be finished immediately. "Mr. Johnson," Emily said in her best teacher voice, "I understand your frustration, but Daniel is working as quickly as possible while maintaining the high standards your car deserves. Would you prefer fast work or good work?" There was a pause. Then Mr. Johnson's voice considerably calmer. "Good work, I suppose." "Excellent choice. Daniel will call you personally when your car is ready." After she hung up, Savannah stared at Emily with newfound respect. "How did you do that?" He was screaming at me for 10 minutes. "Classroom management," Emily explained. "Angry customers are just angry teenagers with credit cards." By the end of the day, we'd caught up on most of the backlog. Emily had somehow convinced 3 customers to reschedule their pickups voluntarily. giving us breathing room for the rest of the week. As we locked up the garage, Savannah pulled me aside. "I like her," she said without preamble. "Good to know. I'm serious, Daniel."
Get.
In one afternoon, she did more to help this family than Linda did in 2 years. And she didn't complain once about getting grease on her shoes. I looked over at Emily, who was carefully washing her hands at the utility sink, chatting with Dave about his plans to start a motorcycle repair side business. She looked completely at ease, like she belonged here just as naturally as she belonged. In her garden, or with her book club friends. "She's pretty amazing," I admitted. "Are you going to do anything about it?" Savannah asked. "Like what? Like stop pretending this is just about gardening and admit you're falling for her?" Before I could answer, Emily appeared beside us. "Ready to go?" she asked, then noticed our serious expressions. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said quickly. "Is talking about tomorrow's schedule?" Emily nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she knew we'd been talking about more than car repairs. As we walked to our vehicles, she touched my arm gently. "You know," she said, "I meant what I said about helping. Not just today, but however long your uncle needs. I know what it's like to feel responsible for everyone and everything. You don't have to carry it all alone." The sincerity in her voice almost undid me. Here was this woman who had her own life to rebuild, her own challenges to face, offering to spend her days in a greasy garage helping my family. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do that?" Emily was quiet for a moment, looking up at the evening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Because when someone matters to you, you show up," she said simply. "And you matter to me, Daniel." The words hung between us in the cooling air, honest and vulnerable and absolutely perfect. I wanted to tell her that she mattered to me too, that she'd become the best part of every day, that I was falling for her so completely it scared me instead. I took her hand, greasy knuckles and all, and squeezed gently. "Thank you," I said, "for today, for everything." She squeezed back. "Thank you for letting me help. It felt good to be useful again." As I watched her drive away, taillights disappearing around the corner, I realized that Savannah was right. This had stopped being about gardening the moment Emily asked her brave question by the tomato plants. The question now was whether I had the courage to do something about it. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Emily and I had shared our first kiss in her garden. I arrived at her house to find her standing on her front porch, holding a piece of paper and looking more shaken than I'd ever seen her. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately abandoning the sprinkler parts I'd been carrying. Emily handed me the paper without a word. It was a letter, typed on plain white paper with no letterhead or signature. The message was brief but unsettling. Some people think they can move into a neighborhood and change everything. Some people are wrong. Mind your own business and stick to your own kind. I read it twice, my jaw tightening with each word. "When did you get this?" "It was under my door this morning when I went out to get the newspaper," Emily said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm weather. "I keep thinking it's some kind of mistake, that maybe it was meant for someone else." "Emily, this is about us," I said gently. "You know that, right?" She nodded slowly. I was hoping maybe it was about my book club being too loud, or the mulch pile, or something equally ridiculous. She looked up at me with worried eyes. "But it's about you being here, isn't it? About us." I folded the letter carefully, anger building in my chest. "This is harassment. We need to call the police." "And tell them what?" "That someone left me a mean note. I'll probably say it's just a crank and file it away somewhere." "It's a threat, Emily. Maybe not a specific one, but it's intimidation." Sat on her porch steps, the morning air suddenly feeling heavy and oppressive. Emily was quiet for a long time, staring at her garden where the tomatoes were finally starting to ripen and the herbs were thriving. "I keep thinking about Phoenix," she said finally. "Derek and I lived in the same house for 28 years and nobody ever left us anonymous letters. We had neighbors who didn't like when we painted our shutters blue instead of white. But they complained to our faces like civilized people. Small towns can be different," I said. "Some people don't like change, and some people think age differences in relationships are their business to judge. But we're not hurting anyone," Emily said, frustration creeping into her voice. We're Not being inappropriate or causing problems. I plant vegetables. You help me plant vegetables. We drink iced tea and talk about books. What exactly is so threatening about that? Before I could answer, Jennifer Peterson appeared at the edge of Emily's property, walking her small white dog on a leash. She moved slowly, clearly hoping to overhear our conversation. "Morning, Jennifer," Emily called out with forced cheerfulness. Jennifer stopped, letting her dog sniff around Emily's mailbox while she studied our faces. "Everything all right over here?" "You both look rather serious." "Just discussing garden plans," I said evenly. Jennifer's eyes lingered on the letter in my hand. "You know, I've been meaning to mention, Emily, that there's been some talk at the town council meetings about neighborhood beautification standards. Nothing specific, of course, but people do notice when properties don't maintain certain expectations." The way she said expectations made it clear she wasn't talking about lawn maintenance. "My property is well maintained," Emily said, her teacher voice emerging with a slight edge. "Oh, of course, dear. I just meant that sometimes new residents don't realize how closely knit our community is. We all look out for each other, notice patterns, that sort of thing." Jennifer's smile was perfectly pleasant and completely cold. "Have a lovely day." After she walked away, Emily turned to me with wide eyes. "Did she just threaten me with code enforcement?" "I think she just threatened you with whatever she could think of," I said grimly. The rest of the morning felt different. Every car that drove slowly past the house made Emily tense. When the mailman arrived, she watched him nervously, as if expecting another unwelcome message. I found myself scanning the street for anyone who might be watching us, feeling protective and angry in equal measure. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. It was Savannah calling from the garage. "Daniel, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "Someone called this morning asking questions about you. Wanted to know if you were reliable, if you had any criminal background. If you were known for causing trouble in relationships." My blood went cold. Did they say who they were? Claimed to be doing a background check for a potential employer, but it felt off. Who does background checks on landscapers? Why would they call Aaron's garage instead of your actual references? Emily was watching my face, and I could see her putting the pieces together. "Guy, someone's checking up on me," I told her after. I hung up. "The same someone who left the letter?" "Probably." Emily stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of her porch. "This is insane. I'm 56 years old. I've never even had a speeding ticket. And now I'm being stalked by some anonymous neighborhood watchdog because I'm dating a younger man." "Don't know that's what this is about," I said, though I was pretty sure it was exactly what this was about, don't we? Emily turned to face me, her green eyes flashing with anger. "The letter talks about my own kind. Jennifer Peterson makes veiled threats about community standards. To dig up dirt on you, what else could this be about?" She was right, and we both knew it. Someone in this quiet, tree-lined neighborhood had decided that our relationship was their business, and they were willing to escalate their disapproval into harassment. "What do we do?" Emily asked, her anger giving way to something that looked like fear. I stood up, moving closer to her. "We don't let them win. We call the police. We document everything, and we keep living our lives. And if it gets worse, then we deal with it together," I said firmly. "Emily, I'm not going anywhere. Just because some coward with a typewriter doesn't approve of us." She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for something. "Even if this gets ugly, even if they make trouble for your business or your family, or even then," I interrupted, "what we have is worth fighting for." Emily stepped closer, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in her worried eyes. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that." She nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Okay, then we fight." But as I held her there on her front porch, with the anonymous letter crumpled in my pocket and the memory of Jennifer Peterson's cold smile fresh in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Someone out there wanted to drive us apart, and they were just getting started. The escalation came exactly 1 week later. It was worse than either of us had imagined. I arrived at Emily's house Friday morning to find her sitting on her front steps, still in her pajamas and robe, staring at her garden with an expression of devastation that made my heart stop. The tomato plants we'd so carefully nurtured were destroyed, not damaged by weather or pests, but deliberately vandalized. Someone had taken garden shears to every plant, cutting them down at soil level and scattering the pieces across the lawn like confetti. "Emily," I said softly, sitting down beside her. "They came in the night," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I heard something around 3 a.m., but I thought it was raccoons. Almost went out to check, but then I thought better of it." She gestured toward the destruction. "I should have checked." "No," I said firmly. "You should never have gone out there alone. This isn't about vegetables anymore, Emily. This is about intimidation." She turned to look at me, and I could see the fear she was trying so hard to hide. What kind of person does this? What kind of person destroys a garden just to make a point? Before I could answer, we heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Penelope Harold and 2 other book club members, Margaret and Ruth, were hurrying toward us with the determined stride of women on a mission. "Emily, honey," Penelope called out, then stopped short when she saw the garden. "My God, who did this?" "We don't know," Emily said, standing up and trying to pull her robe tighter around herself. "I'm sorry, I'm not really dressed for company. Don't you dare apologize." Ruth interrupted, her nurse's training kicking in as she immediately moved to Emily's side. "Someone vandalized your property. You're the victim here," Margaret was. Already walking through the destroyed garden, her librarian's analytical mind cataloging the damage. "This was systematic," she said grimly. "They knew exactly what they were cutting. These weren't random swipes. Someone took time to destroy every single plant." "We heard about the letter," Penelope said quietly. "Dave Harold mentioned it to his mother, and Savannah told me. We came as soon as we could." Emily looked surprised. "You know about the letter?" "Honey, this is a small town," Margaret said. "Word travels fast, especially when it's about harassment. And we wanted you to know that not everyone in this neighborhood is a small-minded busybody." Ruth was examining the cut stems with professional thoroughness. Whoever did this used proper garden shears. "These are clean cuts, not hacking. Someone who knows their way around gardening tools." The implication hung heavy in the air. Random vandalism by teenagers. This was personal, deliberate, and done by someone with gardening knowledge. "Have you called the police?" Penelope asked. "It's not yet," I said. "We just discovered it." "Call them now," Margaret said firmly. "This is destruction of property, and combined with the anonymous letter, it's a pattern of harassment." While I made the call, the 3 women immediately went into action. Penelope started documenting the damage with her phone camera, taking pictures from multiple angles. Ruth began collecting the destroyed plants in garbage bags, preserving them as evidence. Margaret started knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual during the night. Officer Bradley arrived within 20 minutes. A middle-aged man with kind eyes and a thorough approach, he took the harassment seriously, especially when he saw the systematic nature of the destruction. "This wasn't kids playing pranks," he said, examining the clean cuts. "Someone spent real time here. They knew what they were doing." He looked up at Emily. "Any idea who might have a problem with you or your relationship?" Emily glanced at me, then back at Officer Bradley. "There's been some tension from certain neighbors about Daniel and me. We have an age difference, and apparently some people find that objectionable." "Anyone specific make threats or comments?" "Jennifer Peterson has made several pointed remarks about neighborhood standards," I said. "And someone's been making inquiries about my background at my uncle's garage." Officer Bradley nodded, taking notes. "I'll talk to Mrs. Peterson, see what she knows. In the meantime, I'd recommend installing some security cameras. Whoever did this might come back." After the officer left, the book club ladies refused to abandon Emily. Margaret returned from her door-to-door investigation with mixed results. Most neighbors claimed to have heard nothing, though old Mr. Williams across the street mentioned seeing a figure with a flashlight around 3 a.m., but assumed it was Emily checking on something. "We're staying," Penelope announced when Emily suggested they'd done enough. "At least until Daniel can get some security measures in place." "You don't have to," Emily started. "We absolutely do," Ruth interrupted. "Nobody messes with our book. Club members. Besides, I brought my grandson's baseball bat. It's been a while since I've had an excuse to use it. Dave Harold arrived around noon with a carload of security equipment borrowed from various relatives. Uncle Aaron always said the best deterrent is good lighting and cameras, he explained, unloading motion sensor lights and a basic security camera system. As we worked to install the equipment, with the book club ladies supervising and offering unsolicited advice about optimal camera angles, Emily pulled me aside. I keep thinking about what you said, she said quietly, about not letting them win. Having second thoughts? No, she said, but there was something fragile in her voice. But I need to know that you understand what you're signing up for. This isn't going to stop with garden vandalism. Whoever did this is escalating, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her directly. Emily, listen to me. 6 weeks ago, I was a guy who fixed other people's problems and went home to an empty apartment every night. I was sleepwalking through my own life. You changed that. You made me want to wake up, want to build something, want to fight for something that matters. But your business, your family will support us because they can see what I see, I interrupted. That you're worth fighting for, that this is worth fighting for. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I love my garden. I know that sounds stupid. But those plants represented starting over, growing something beautiful from nothing. Then we'll plant again, I said simply. As many times as it takes, they'll just destroy it again. Maybe, but we'll have cameras this time, and neighbors who care. And a book club armed with baseball bats. I smiled at her. Besides, I hear gardening builds character. Despite everything, Emily laughed. You're insane. Probably. But I'm not going anywhere. As the afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees, casting long shadows across Emily's destroyed garden, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. We weren't just dealing with harassment anymore. We were building something together. Emily's community had become our community, and we were stronger for it. The anonymous letter writer and garden destroyer had wanted to isolate us, to make us feel alone and vulnerable. Instead, they'd accomplished the opposite. They'd shown us exactly who we could count on, exactly what we were fighting for. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emily's security cameras caught more than we'd bargained for. 3 days after the garden destruction, I was at Emily's house reviewing the footage on her laptop when I noticed something odd in the time stamp from 2 nights earlier. At 11:47 p.m., a figure appeared at the edge of the camera's range. But instead of approaching the garden, they seemed to be placing something near Emily's mailbox. Can you enhance this section? I asked Dave, who had appointed himself our technical support team. Dave squinted at the screen, adjusting the contrast. It's still pretty grainy, but look at this. He pointed to a clearer frame. See that? It's not someone leaving something, they're taking something. Emily leaned over my shoulder to get a better look. Taking what? Let me check something, Dave said, fast-forwarding through several hours of footage. At 6:15 a.m., the same figure. Returned, this time clearly placing an envelope near the mailbox before disappearing. They're staging the letters, I realized. Placing them early in the morning so Emily finds them when she gets her newspaper, but they're actually checking. The mailbox the night before? Checking for what? Emily asked. Dave grinned with the satisfaction of someone solving a puzzle. I bet they're looking for outgoing mail. Names, addresses, maybe even reading your letters to figure out your routine. Emily's face went pale. Federal crime, mail tampering. The next evening we were ready. Officer Bradley had positioned himself across the street in an unmarked car, while Dave monitored the camera feed from inside Emily's house. Emily and I sat on her couch, pretending to watch television, while actually watching the clock tick toward midnight. At 11:52 p.m., Dave whispered urgently, "Someone's coming." Through the window, we could see a shadowy figure approaching the mailbox with a small flashlight. Officer Bradley's radio crackled softly as he called for backup, but we could all see enough to recognize the person rifling through. Emily's mailbox, it was Jennifer Peterson. When Officer Bradley's car lights suddenly illuminated the scene, Jennifer froze like a deer caught in headlights. Emily's electric bill in one hand and a flashlight in the other, The confrontation that followed was almost anticlimactic. Jennifer, faced with irrefutable evidence and federal mail tampering charges, crumbled immediately. Through tears and increasingly desperate explanations, the whole story came out. She'd been watching Emily since she'd moved in, convinced that a divorced woman living alone would bring the wrong element to the neighborhood. When Daniel started appearing regularly, Jennifer had decided we were proof of the moral decline she'd been predicting for years. "You don't understand," Jennifer sobbed, as Officer Bradley read her rights, moved in, and immediately started changing things. The garden, the men coming around, those loud book club meetings. This used to be a quiet, respectable neighborhood. Emily's book club friends, who had insisted on being present for the confrontation, were less than sympathetic. "Quiet?" Margaret snorted. "Jennifer, you've called the police on children playing in their own yards, complained about holiday decorations, and tried to ban the ice cream truck because it was too festive." "And respectable?" added Ruth. "You've been stalking a neighbor and destroying her property. That's not respectable, that's criminal." As Officer Bradley led Jennifer away, Penelope shook her head sadly. 20 years I've lived next door to that woman, and I never realized how truly miserable she was." Emily sank onto her porch steps, looking drained. "All this time I thought it was about Daniel and me, about our age difference or people thinking I was having some kind of crisis. It was never about us," I said, sitting beside her. "It was about someone who couldn't stand seeing other people find happiness." Dave was already uploading the camera footage to his phone. "Wait until Uncle Aaron hears about this. He's been dealing with Jennifer's complaints about cars parked on the street for 15 years. "It's over," Emily said quietly, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "The harassment is over," I corrected. "But we're just getting started." She looked at me questioningly. I said, gesturing toward her destroyed garden. "We have some serious replanting to do, and I was thinking maybe it's time to expand. Add some fruit trees, maybe a greenhouse for winter vegetables." Emily smiled for the first time in days. "You know what? I like the sound of that. But this time, we're planting roses by the mailbox, the thorniest ones we can find." 2 weeks after "And respectable?" added Ruth. "You've been stalking a neighbor and destroying her property. That's not respectable, that's criminal." As Officer Bradley led Jennifer away, Penelope shook her head sadly. 20 years I've lived next door to that woman, and I never realized how truly miserable she was." Emily sank onto her porch steps, looking drained. "All this time I thought it was about Daniel and me, about our age difference or people thinking I was having some kind of crisis. It was never about us," I said, sitting beside her. "It was about someone who couldn't stand seeing other people find happiness." Dave was already uploading the camera footage to his phone. "Wait until Uncle Aaron hears about this. He's been dealing with Jennifer's complaints about cars parked on the street for 15 years. "It's over," Emily said quietly, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "The harassment is over," I corrected. "But we're just getting started." She looked at me questioningly. I said, gesturing toward her destroyed garden. "We have some serious replanting to do, and I was thinking maybe it's time to expand. Add some fruit trees, maybe a greenhouse for winter vegetables." Emily smiled for the first time in days. "You know what? I like the sound of that. But this time, we're planting roses by the mailbox, the thorniest ones we can find." 2 weeks after Jennifer Peterson's arrest, Emily and I were sitting on her porch swing at sunset, watching the new tomato seedlings we'd planted that morning. The security cameras were still there, but they felt less like protection now, and more like a reminder of how far we'd come. "I've been thinking," Emily said, setting down her glass of iced tea, "about what you said that first day by the fence, about staying here, even if I'm 56. I turned to look at her, noting the thoughtful expression I'd grown to love. "What about it?" "I think I asked the wrong question." "How so?" Emily shifted on the swing to face me fully. "I was so worried about my age, about whether you could accept being with someone older. But the real question wasn't whether you'd stay despite my age. It was whether we could build something real together." I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers. "And what's your answer?" "Look around," she said, gesturing toward her garden where new plants were already reaching toward the sun. toward the street where neighbors now waved instead of stared, toward the house that had become a gathering place for her book club and my family alike. We already have. She was right. Somewhere between the irrigation disasters and the harassment and the community rallying around us, we'd built something neither of us had been looking for, but both of us needed. Emily, I said, my heart suddenly racing with the weight of what I wanted to say. That first day when you asked if I'd stay, I said yes because it felt right. But I didn't know then what I know now, which is that staying isn't enough. I don't just want to be here for the easy parts or even the hard parts. I want to be here for all of it. The failed irrigation systems and the successful harvests, the nosy neighbors and the supportive friends, the quiet mornings and the chaotic book club meetings. Emily's eyes softened. Daniel. I'm not finished, I said, standing up from the swing and taking both her hands in mine. I want to plant fruit trees with you and watch them grow. I want to expand this garden until it takes over half the yard. I want to host Thanksgiving dinner for your book club and my crazy family. I want to wake up every morning knowing that whatever problems we face, we're facing them together. I kissed her then, there on her front porch, as the sun set behind the oak trees and the new tomato plants whispered promises of harvests to come. When we broke apart, Emily was laughing through her tears. You realize, she said, that Penelope is going to insist on planning the entire wedding, and Margaret will want to research the historical significance of garden weddings. And Ruth will have opinions about the catering. Let them, I said. We'll need all the help we can get if we want to fit both our families and your book club. In half the neighborhood in this backyard. Our backyard, Emily corrected softly. Our backyard, I agreed. Our garden, our home, our life. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, we sat back down on the swing. Emily curled against my side as we planned our future in whispered conversations about guest lists and flower arrangements and all the beautiful ordinary details of a life built together. 6 months later, I was standing in Emily's backyard. Our backyard now, watching my new wife direct traffic for what had to be the most chaotic wedding reception in Riverside's history. True to prediction, Penelope had indeed taken charge of planning. Margaret had researched the historical significance of garden weddings, apparently quite extensive. Ruth had very strong opinions about the catering, all of which turned out to be correct. It's Daniel. Emily called from across the yard where she was attempting to prevent Uncle Aaron from getting into a heated debate with Margaret about the proper soil pH for the new apple trees we'd planted. Your uncle is trying to mansplain composting too. A retired librarian who's been gardening for 40 years? I laughed, making my way through the crowd of family, friends, and neighbors who had gathered to celebrate our wedding. The ceremony had taken place that morning under the oak trees. With Penelope officiating, she'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion, and Dave serving as photographer, videographer, and self-appointed director of festivities. Emily had worn a simple green dress that brought out her eyes. I'd opted for a navy suit that didn't show garden soil, a practical consideration. Given that we'd insisted on having the reception in the same space where we'd fallen in love, the tomato plants, now heavy with light summer fruit, served as our backdrop, along with the roses by the mailbox that had grown into a formidable barrier against any future harassment. How's married life treating you? Savannah asked, appearing at my elbow with a plate of Ruth's famous potato salad. It's been 3 hours, I pointed out. And I looked across the yard where Emily was now deep in conversation with Dave about his latest videography project, while simultaneously keeping an eye on the book club ladies, who were engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly animated discussion about plot holes in mystery novels. Perfect, I said honestly. Chaotic, loud, and perfect. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself constantly amazed by how naturally our two worlds had blended. Uncle Aaron was teaching Emily's book club friends about engine maintenance while they schooled him on literary analysis. Dave was filming everything while providing running commentary that had everyone laughing. My mother, who had initially been concerned about the age difference, was now deep in conversation with Emily about lesson planning techniques for her own volunteer tutoring work. You know, Emily said, appearing beside me as the sun began to set. I keep thinking about that first day when you arrived to fix my irrigation disaster. What about it? I was so focused on trying to control everything, the water flow, the plant spacing, the timing. But the best things that happened were the ones I didn't plan. I wrapped my arms around her from behind as we watched our guests mingling in the golden evening light. Like what? Like asking you that question by the tomato plants? Like your nephew showing up unannounced. It's like my book club falling in love with you. Like Jennifer Peterson's harassment actually bringing our community closer together. Like falling in love with someone who makes the best iced tea in 3 counties. Emily laughed, leaning back against my chest. Like discovering that the life you think you want isn't nearly as good as the life you never saw coming. As if on cue, Penelope clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced in her best book club voice, if I could have a moment to toast, our newlyweds. The crowd gathered around us, faces warm with wine and happiness, and the satisfaction of a celebration well executed. Uncle Aaron stood next to Margaret, both of them slightly dirt-stained from their gardening demonstration. Dave had his camera, ready, documenting everything for posterity. Ruth was already cutting the cake with military precision, while the rest of the book club supervised. To Emily and Daniel, Penelope continued, raising her glass, who proved that the best relationships grow like the best gardens with patience, tension, and the occasional irrigation disaster that forces you to start over better than before. To Emily and Daniel. The crowd echoed, and I felt Emily's hand squeeze mine as we were surrounded by the laughter and love of everyone who mattered to us. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone home and we'd finished cleaning up the yard, Emily and I sat on our porch swing, exhausted but happy. So, she said, curling up beside me in the gathering darkness, what's next for the garden? I'm thinking maybe blueberry bushes along the back fence. Blueberries sound perfect, I agreed, but maybe we should start with getting through our honeymoon first. Emily smiled. Good point, but after that, I said, kissing the top of her head, we plant blueberries, and whatever else grows. 1 year later, I was kneeling in our garden on a crisp October morning, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes while Emily sat on the porch steps grading papers. She'd taken a part-time position teaching adult education classes at the community college. I'd expanded my landscaping business to include 3 new clients who'd hired me after seeing what we'd accomplished in our own backyard, the Hendersons. Want to know if we can design their spring garden? Emily called out, looking up from a particularly challenging essay about career transitions. Apparently word is getting out about our expertise. I laughed, carefully placing a perfect heirloom tomato in my basket. Our expertise in what? Surviving harassment and growing vegetables. Building something beautiful together, she said simply. That's rarer than you'd think. The garden around us bore little resemblance to the disaster zone I'd first encountered over a year ago. Where once there had been scattered plants and broken irrigation lines, we now had raised beds filled with herbs, vegetables, and flowers in carefully planned succession. The apple trees we'd planted after the wedding were already showing signs of next year's fruit, and the blueberry bushes along the back fence had given us our first small harvest in late summer. But the real transformation wasn't in the plants, it was in the life we'd built around them. The security cameras were long gone, replaced by a bird feeder that attracted cardinals and chickadees. The book club still met here monthly, with meetings that had evolved into potluck dinners where Margaret brought literary-themed appetizers, and Ruth provided medical advice to anyone willing to listen. Uncle Aaron had recovered completely from his heart attack, and now stopped by weekly to argue with Emily about composting techniques, arguments that had become a form of affectionate ritual. You know what I realized? Emily said, setting aside her papers and walking over to where I was working. What's that? That day when I asked if you'd stay here, even if I was 56? So I wasn't really asking about staying. I was asking if you'd grow with me. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and took her hands, still soft, but now permanently stained with garden soil and ink from grading. And look what we grew, she said, gesturing not just to the garden, but to everything around us. The house with its welcoming porch. The neighborhood where we'd become not just residents, but fixtures. the community of friends and family, who gathered here for holidays and book discussions and impromptu dinners. I was just fixing her garden, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken so many times when people asked how we'd met. That's all it was supposed to be. Emily smiled, the same transformative smile that had started everything.
Ow.
Best irrigation disaster ever. As we walked back toward the house, arms full of vegetables and hearts full of quiet satisfaction, I realized that Emily had been right from the beginning. The best things in life, love, community, happiness, couldn't be controlled, or planned or forced. They grew naturally when you created the right conditions: patience, tension, and the willingness to start over when things went wrong. Behind us, the garden settled into its autumn rest, preparing for next year's growth. And inside the house, we began planning what we'd plant in the spring. After all, we had plenty of time and so much more to grow together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.